So today we're talking about Michigan's Proposal 3 on the right to choose, the right to abortion, and the right to reproductive health care. So the right to choose or right to abortion is a fundamental right, not only for body autonomy, but also to have general health care and women and children's health in particular. It is all the more important in societies like Canada and the US, where the right to shelter, food, education, and a livelihood are not at all guaranteed, but are privileges. This summer, the US Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, a decision from 1973 which granted the right to abortion on the basis of the 14th Amendment. As a result of the overturning of this interpretation of the US Constitution, many people in the US, in at least 2 US states, took it upon themselves to organize during the US midterm elections to get questions on the ballot to affirm this right at the state level, as a result of no actions being taken to guarantee it either federally by any governments. Today, I'm joined by Boncitu Kitaba, Deputy Legal Director for the Michigan American Civil Liberties Union, which was part of the Reproductive Freedom for All, the entity that formed the official Yes campaign to have Michigan's Constitution enshrine the right to choose. Boncito co-wrote the constitutional amendment that was put on the ballot in the state of Michigan's midterm elections and voted in that election for the first time as a US citizen. In Michigan, this ballot question was known as Proposal 3 or Prop 3 and successfully passed with 56.7% of the vote of over 2.4 million people voting for it out of 4.5 million people who turned out, and the population of registered voters in Michigan is approximately 8.2. Welcome, Boncito, and congratulations on this victory for human rights.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So the right to abortion is not guaranteed explicitly in the US Constitution, and instead it was made a matter of privacy as part of the Supreme Court in Roe v. Wade. This interpretation meant that it could be overturned by a new interpretation. Can you talk about why it was important to have the right to abortion, right to choose in the state constitution?
Yes. So the right to choose is one of the most fundamental rights that anyone could enjoy. And really, it has its genesis in the right to bodily autonomy, the right to decide what happens to your own body. And for many people, especially for people in Michigan, there was resounding support for this right to decide what happens to one's own body. And because the US Supreme Court was no longer going to protect that fundamental right, we knew it was critical to do that in our state under our own constitution. And it was even more important because in Michigan, we had a law on the books from 1931 that banned virtually all forms of abortion except for a narrow circumstance to save the life of the pregnant person. And that law was going to revive as soon as the US Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. So Michigan could have reverted automatically back to 1931 and all abortions would have been illegal. People could have faced, and providers could have faced, up to 4 years in prison for providing safe health care that they have been doing for the last 49 years. And so once the US Supreme Court overturned Roe in the Dobbs decision, we knew that we had to act quickly and act swiftly. And in fact, we had been planning for that moment for many years prior.
Awesome. So what's the process to get something on a midterm ballot in the United States? Or maybe in the state of Michigan, I'm not sure if it's different in different states.
Yes, the process to get a question qualified for the ballot to go to voters to decide depends on the state you live in. Each state has a different procedural process. Some of the processes go through the legislature, and some of them are citizens initiated. In Michigan, we have sort of a dual track of citizens-led ballot initiative processes. One is to amend the state constitution, which is what Proposal 3 purported to do. And the other process is state-initiated law. So if you wanted to initiate a statute or a law that's not about the Constitution, but it's a standalone law, you have to collect the requisite number of signatures within the time period and get those signatures certified for the ballot. It goes through a rigorous process of verification, and then the Board of State Canvassers certifies you for the ballot. But before it makes it to the ballot, it stops over with our legislature, and that law could be adopted by the legislature, and the legislature could pass it on their own. It could make changes to it. And in the past, the legislature in Michigan has made changes to substantial laws that were initiated by citizens. But then it just gets passed, or the legislature could deny adopting it, and it goes to voters. On the other hand, what Proposal 3 did was it initiated a constitutional amendment process, which means that you have to collect 8% of the number of votes casted in the last gubernatorial election, and that is the number of signatures that you have to collect and be verified. So for 2022, to qualify for this election ballot, we were required to collect 425,059 valid signatures to qualify Proposal 3 for the ballot. And that is a huge number. It is the most that was required to collect thus far. And you're required to even collect even more than that, because there are some times where people might not remember that they signed twice, or there might be an issue with their signature. Something in the verification process might kick a signature out. And so you have to make sure that you collect even more than that, so you have enough of a cushion in case some of those get thrown out. And so the process that Proposal 3 went through was that we, first of all, when you're exploring the idea of a ballot initiative, you have to comply with campaign finance laws and develop corporate structures and develop a ballot question committee and formally file that. And then you have to engage in signature collection. And then you have to qualify those signatures for the ballot. And after the Board of State Canvassers qualifies you for the ballot, then your campaign officially launches, and you get to convince voters that they should vote yes on your proposal. And then hopefully you reach the election and you've convinced enough people to then vote your proposal in.
So if we could go back, because that's a lot of signatures that you folks had to get, and as you mentioned, you had to get even more than that. How did you kind of involve people in that? And then also you had mentioned there's a timeline, right? So within which kind of time frame did you have to collect this number of signatures?
Yeah, so you have to collect signatures within a window of 180 days before, within any window. So that window can keep shifting from the moment that you collect the first signature, or your signatures might become stale if you collect them outside of that 180-day window. So we launched the campaign in January 2022, and the date that we had to qualify was in early July. So between January and July, we had to collect this huge number of signatures. And we knew that we had to convince voters that this was something that's important to them, that they needed to volunteer for the campaign to help us collect signatures, because this was a statewide effort. We had to reach people all across the state. So we engaged in both volunteer signature gathering, where we tried to cultivate an army of volunteers to go out on the streets, to go to farmers markets, to go to their local schools and their families and their friends, and collect every signature possible from them. And we also hired a signature gathering firm, to help us collect the requisite number of signatures. So we were moving on these two tracks while simultaneously trying to get the education out there about how important it is for people to sign on, what the proposal means, how it would benefit them and benefit our state. And we were able to collect almost 950,000 signatures based on these two efforts alone.
So it sounds like there was a lot of people who were involved in the campaign. Like, I know as part of ACLU, you were one party who was involved in the campaign, but there were others who formed it. What was the response that you folks got? Obviously, based on the numbers, you almost doubled the signature, or you did double the signatures that were required.
Yeah, so what was really beautiful about this campaign was that it was developed by a very diverse group of coalition members. organizations that worked in reproductive rights spaces like the ACLU and Planned Parenthood, but other organizations and grassroots groups like Michigan Voices, who was one of our key partners in this ballot process, and the entire reproductive justice table that they developed of groups that worked in different spaces with impacted people. Some of them worked in reproductive rights, some of them not, but they all were brought together under this umbrella of reproductive justice. And we worked together as a coalition to put together the campaign and the proposal. And we were seeking input even on the language of the proposal from different stakeholders in state and nationally, people that were directly impacted by it. So it was really a culmination of all of our brains and minds working together. And when we launched it, really, we were trying to convince people that this is what was going to happen, that the US Supreme Court was really poised to overturn Roe versus Wade. I don't think people really understood that that could be a possibility. You know, in our modern times, we really haven't seen the court overturn long-standing precedent like they had in Dobbs. And so people were a little bit reluctant, I might say, at first to get on board. They thought, you know, abortion is protected in Michigan. It has been for the last 49 years. We don't really see much changing. But people were still on board, and some people really understood that we needed long-lasting protections in our state constitution. But really, there was a big turning point when the draft decision from Justice Alito leaked. And that decision sent the whole state into chaos. People finally, I think, saw that in their own words, the US Supreme Court could be ready to overturn Roe versus Wade. And they saw that that was imminent, that decision could just come out in the next couple months. And so that really galvanized people. Overnight, we had thousands of people reaching out to us to volunteer for the campaign, to collect signatures. And from then until the Dobbs decision actually came out, we had thousands of people going out and collecting signatures. And then when the Dobbs decision came out, that expanded and just multiplied the number of people that wanted to volunteer, wanted to help out. They knew finally, once and for all, that we were not a safe state for reproductive rights, and they needed to do something about it. People were really angry that the US Supreme Court took this action to overturn their rights. People told us in their stories that they might have been fighting for the first, you know, in the first movement of reproductive rights before Roe versus Wade was decided even, and they were exhausted and a little exasperated that they have to fight this fight again, but they were ready to do it. And we joined hands and we built this really beautiful coalition of volunteers and people all across the state from every single county, from the Upper Peninsula all the way down to the borders of Illinois and Indiana. And this whole state really came together behind this movement.
That sounds really empowering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was great.
So what did you learn from this process, I guess?
Oh, so much. I learned a lot about campaigns. I learned a lot about how to build a movement and how to build a campaign around a particular issue. And I learned how hard that could be with a topic like abortion and like reproductive rights. To me and to many people, abortion is not stigmatized. It's part of healthcare. But to a lot of people, it is still a taboo topic or stigmatized or something that people don't want to talk about. But I think I learned that we need to talk about these rights, because if we don't, then we lose and we risk that these rights are going to be taken away from us. And I learned about the power of people, that Michiganders can come together themselves and put a question on the ballot about their own rights and talk about how they want to protect their rights in their own state. And they could pass a measure and actually amend their state constitution to be able to do that and take power back into their own hands. Because I really think that people were feeling helpless and powerless when they saw these decisions come down from the US Supreme Court. And I learned a lot about, my personal capacity to become a lawyer who is a more well-rounded dedicated advocate. At the ACLU of Michigan, we are not just lawyers, we are ambassadors and we are advocates for civil rights and civil liberties. But in this movement, really talking to people from all walks of life and trying to resonate and talk to them in their own language about this particular issue, I think has made me a better advocate and has taught me a lot about where we still need to go in terms of maintaining access and ensuring access to reproductive rights for everyone in the state, because that's still a challenge. There are still barriers for people to access care. So that's really part of the next phase of this fight.
Awesome. And it sounds like you didn't discriminate in terms of who you went to see either, or like, even though it was kind of a sensitive topic, as you're mentioning, that it was anybody. We would go and talk to anybody. It wasn't like party lines. It wasn't like not this group or that kind of thing. It sounds like, I don't know if that's true.
No, that's true. And I think from our research, we discovered and sort of affirmed what we already knew, was that accessing reproductive rights is a very strong Michigan value, that the majority of Michiganders believe that we should have the right to choose what happens to our own bodies. And that doesn't mean that I get to choose what happens to your body or you get to choose what I decide, but that if a circumstance arises and I need to make that choice, that we all respect each other's ability to make that choice alongside our medical and healthcare providers. And I think that idea resonates with everyone, no matter your political persuasion or your background or your beliefs or your status or your identity. I think there's something in there that really resonates with everyone. And there's, of course, going to be people that fundamentally don't agree with that, and they will never be convinced of that fact. But luckily, they are a minority. And so the majority were the ones that really came out from all walks of life, from every county in our state, from people from very conservative counties who voted to pass Proposal 3, to very liberal counties, from people all the way up in the Upper Peninsula, even people that in that part of the state where they have very limited access to reproductive rights. So this is an issue that I think really touches on everyone, regardless of their identity, because it really affects every single person. Either, you have had an experience with abortion, or someone you love has had an experience with abortion or reproductive rights. I think the beautiful thing about our proposal was that it not only protected the right to abortion, but it protected the full spectrum of reproductive health care, everything from access to contraception and prenatal care and postnatal care to miscarriage management and infertility and abortion. So there's something that I think people can resonate with along that whole spectrum.
Mm-hmm. That was one thing that when I read it, it was very all encompassing, I guess, because this issue, even like you mentioned, of contraception, that having to be in there just to guarantee that, yes, in fact, people have the right to choose whether or not they use contraception. Because over here in Canada, obviously, with the overturning of that decision, it was kind of like, you can't even have that conversation. Like, that could be considered an illegal conversation. Like, that was really, really significant. Yeah. So what happens now that it's been passed? Does it automatically become integrated into the Michigan Charter? How does that work? Or the Constitution?
So it will become effective on December 23rd, 45 days after the election. So it will go into the Michigan Constitution as Article 1, Section 28, as of December 23rd. That's when it will take immediate effect. And then it will become the law of the land, and it will be sort of one of the most supreme forms of the law, because it's embedded in our state constitution.
That's awesome. Would you mind reading it for us?
Sure.
Okay.
Happy to. So Article 1, Section 28, Declaration of Rights, Reproductive Freedom. Section 1, every individual has the fundamental right to reproductive freedom, which entails the right to make and effectuate decisions about all matters relating to pregnancy, including but not limited to prenatal care, childbirth, postpartum care, contraception, sterilization, abortion care, miscarriage management, and infertility care. An individual's right to reproductive freedom shall not be denied, burdened, nor infringed upon unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means. Notwithstanding the above, the state may regulate the provision of abortion care after fetal viability, provided that in no circumstance shall the state prohibit an abortion that, in the medical judgment of an attending healthcare professional, is medically indicated to protect the life or physical or mental health of the pregnant individual. Section 2. The state shall not discriminate in the protection or enforcement of this fundamental right. Section 3. The state shall not penalize, prosecute, or otherwise take adverse action against an individual based on their actual potential, perceived, or alleged pregnancy outcomes, including but not limited to miscarriage, stillbirth, or abortion. Nor shall the state penalize, prosecute, or otherwise take adverse action against someone for aiding or assisting a pregnant individual in exercising their right to reproductive freedom with their voluntary consent. Section 4. For the purposes of this section, a state interest is compelling only if it is for the limited purpose of protecting the health of an individual seeking care, consistent with accepted clinical practices, standards of practice, and evidence-based medicine, and does not infringe on that individual's autonomous decision-making. Fetal viability means the point in pregnancy when, in the official professional judgment of an attending healthcare professional, and based on the particular facts of the case, there is a significant likelihood of the fetus's sustained survival outside the uterus without the application of extraordinary medical measures. And Section 5. This section shall be self-executing. Any provision of this section held invalid shall be severable from the remaining portions of this section.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, not only for all of your work to bring this to the ballot and get it to pass and all that, but also for coming and talking to me about it today.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me on today.